Hello everyone, my name is Joe Lavello, and I'm here to discuss the case study of the Equifax Data Breach of 2017. The purpose of this presentation is to address CISO's request to analyze the breach and provide actionable insights. We want to understand the issues surrounding the breach and leverage lessons learned from the cyber event to better prepare for future incidents. So let's jump into it. So the agenda for this presentation is as follows. I'm going to do a quick overview of the breach, and then I'll get into the organizational issues surrounding the breach. I'll discuss the root cause of the incident. Then we'll examine the timeline of the actual breach and the chain of events surrounding the incident. I'm going to talk about key missteps by the company and suggest an alternative response, followed up by some prevention strategies. And then I'll discuss leveraging NIST, cybersecurity framework, defense in depth, and zero trust architecture to build a robust security framework. I'll make some recommendations going forward, followed by a summary of the lessons learned, and then I'll conclude the presentation with my closing thought. The Equifax breach of 2017 was one of the most significant cybersecurity incidents in history. It exposed the personal information of over 147 million people. The breach occurred due to a vulnerability in the Apache Struts software application. Despite numerous warnings, Equifax failed to patch the software application, leaving an open door into the system. And this allowed attackers to access names, social security numbers, birth dates, addresses, driver's license numbers, and credit card details. Equifax discovered the breach in July of 2017, however, did not disclose until September of 2017. And the delay in the disclosure led to public outrage and eventually legal action. The company faced lawsuits and regulatory fines and eventually settled with the U.S. government for a hefty $700 million fine to compensate affected consumers. The breach really underscores the importance of cybersecurity practices and timely software updates. So let's review the organizational issues. The Equifax data breach resulted from failures on both the technical side and the governance side. On the technical side, we have poor patch management, where Equifax failed to patch a known vulnerability despite being notified months earlier that this would allow attackers to exploit the flaw. There's fragment IT structure. So Equifax had a complex and poorly coordinated IT infrastructure, which made it difficult to enforce security policies on a consistent basis. Weak network segmentation. Attackers were able to move laterally once they were in the network. This was due to inadequate segmentation, which enabled the attackers to access sensitive data. And there was an expired IDS certificate, and the intrusion detection system had an expired certificate which prevented critical security alerts from being detected in time. And then weak risk management. Equifax did not effectively follow the NIST cybersecurity framework, particularly in the risk assessment, monitoring, and response planning. This left them vulnerable to the preventable threat or the preventable attack. From a government or governance perspective, there was a lack of accountability. Equifax failed to ensure that security vulnerabilities were properly addressed. And the critical Apache Struts vulnerability remained unpatched despite the known risks. And this is a failure in oversight and enforcement of security protocols. So weak cybersecurity culture within the company. Security is not ingrained in the company culture, and employees did not really prioritize security updates. There was inadequate communication between IT and security teams, and the company also lacked a robust system for tracking and verifying patch implementation. In addition to failing to patch failing to patch the vulnerability, the company had poor internal security practices, and such a weak network segmentation and inadequate monitoring allowed attackers to remain undetected for months. So therefore, leadership really failed to prioritize cybersecurity, and this is what led to widespread data exposure and regulatory penalties. Let's talk about the root cause of the breach. This was due basically to the failure to patch a known vulnerability in the Apache Struts web application framework. And despite a security update being available in March of 2017, Equifax failed to apply the patch in a timely manner. And this gave hackers an opportunity to exploit the vulnerability and gain unauthorized access to sensitive personal data of millions of customers. And to make matters worse, the delay in detection and the company's slow response allowed attackers 76 days of dwell time to move around and conduct their operations within the network. Let's look at the impact analysis. You can see the vulnerability has a base score of 10, which is critical. Additionally, no privileges are required to exploit the vulnerability, making the impact score metric high, which is the most serious rating. And frankly, making matters worse, the vulnerability's attack complexity is low. Therefore, it doesn't take a seasoned hacker to exploit this vulnerability. So let's look at the chain of events on the right. You can see that how it all kind of unfolded. In March of 2017, there was a vulnerability identified, and however, Equifax failed to do the patch, and so the hackers exploited this unpatched vulnerability and gained access to the sensitive data. In July, towards the end of July, Equifax did detect suspicious activity, and they did take action to stop it. And eventually, sometime in August, they hired a security experts firm to come in and do an investigation. However, the damage has already been done. And in September, Equifax came out and publicly disclosed the breach. And later that month, the CEO, Richard Smith, resigned. July, 2 years later, Equifax agreed to the settlement with FTC and states attorneys general. So it was just a very bad situation for Equifax and its customers. Okay, so let's walk through some of the missteps during this time. One, failure to patch the vulnerability in a timely manner. Two, weak internal security controls. And delayed detection and response. It took 76 days to detect this breach. Unencrypted sensitive data. Stored personally identifiable information without adequate encryption. Poor incident handling, slow response, lack of transparency, delayed public exposure or disclosure, insecure web application, inadequate monitoring, and the failure of Equifax to detect the unauthorized access early. Terrible. Mismanagement of the crisis. They had a faulty response website, and their customer support was ineffective. And to make matters worse, there were several executives who sold the stock before the breach was disclosed. And this raised ethical concerns about insider trading. And all of these missteps, led to the exposure of 147 million individuals having their personal data stolen, which resulted in reputational and financial damage to the company. So an alternative incident response strategy for this data breach could have focused on the following: immediate patch deployment and threat detection, where Equifax could have enforced automated patch management and intrusion detection to help identify and mitigate unauthorized access. Faster breach identification and containment. So instead of discovering the breach in July, a real-time security monitoring system could have detected abnormal data exfiltration sooner, which would have prevented prolonged exposure. Transparent and timely public disclosure. So, they waited until September. Equifax had notified those affected by the breach immediately and provided clear guidance. I think the incident, while still bad, wouldn't have received so much widespread anger. And then better consumer protection measures. So Equifax should have automatically frozen affected customers' credit reports instead of offering some sort of flawed credit monitoring service, and maybe provided immediate fraud alerts. And stronger internal accountability and security culture. Boy, this would have gone a long way. Having a dedicated cybersecurity task force with executive oversight that ensures more resilient response plan. This preventing critical missteps in the way they handled the breach. So let's talk a little bit about prevention and mitigation strategies. So here's a few that I think are important. One, patch management. We should force a 48-hour patch policy for critical vulnerabilities. And this falls under the NIST framework of PROTECT. We should do network segmentation, and so that we can limit lateral movement by isolating critical systems, following defense in depth strategy, and combine that with zero trust architecture to create a more robust security posture by layering security measures and continuously verifying access. And we can't forget about encryption. We must encrypt data at rest and in transit to reduce exposure. And continuous monitoring to observe IT systems and networks in order to detect and respond to vulnerabilities and security threats. And we'll conduct regular security awareness training programs for our employees and vendors to make sure that we can avoid any further issues and keep people aware of what's going on. This would be part of our IAM program. And I think the outcome of these steps, implementing these would have prevented the breach or at least minimized its impact by reducing the attack surface. And I think there's a really interesting opportunity to combine the zero trust architecture and defense in depth to create a robust, multi-layered strategic strategy that enforces strict access controls and continuous verification for every user and device within the network and while implementing multiple protective layers. So what have we learned from all of this? Well, let's talk about key lessons and some takeaways. One, timely patching is crucial. I think this breach being that it was caused by an unpatched vulnerability. Had Equifax taken the time to identify it and patch, it would have really taken care of this problem a lot more in a timely manner. Strong cybersecurity practices, regular security audits, vulnerability scans, and a robust incident response plan are essential to mitigate threats. Data encryption and segmentation. Sensitive data should always be encrypted, and access should be restricted to minimize exposure in the event of a breach. Our incident response and transparency. Equifax faced criticism for their delayed public disclosure, and companies must have a clear incident response plan and communicate breaches promptly and transparently. And then regulatory compliance and accountability. This breach led to significant fines and stricter regulations. Businesses have to comply with data protection laws and establish accountability for cybersecurity practices. I believe that these lessons emphasize the importance of proactive security measures and rapid response and responsible data management to prevent breaches in the future. So to build a robust security framework for the company, I suggest the integration of NIST's cybersecurity framework with zero trust architecture and defense in depth. The NIST framework provides a structured risk-based approach to security with 5 core functions with the addition of the governance function. Identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, and govern. Combined with the zero trust architecture, which operates on the principle of never trust and always verify. And I think this is really important. We use multi-factor authentication and continuously verify identification. And we should always use least privilege access, where role-based access and micro-segmentation is enforced. We don't want to give people too much ability to move around within the network just for the role that, give them the privileges they need just for the role. And we assume that there's going to be a breach. So therefore we implement network segmentation, endpoint detection, and behavioral analytics. And additionally, integrating defense in depth, which is a layered security system, which helps to mitigate risk by ensuring multiple controls at various levels. So for instance, network security with firewalls, network segmentation, endpoint security, antivirus, device hardening, application security. We require secure coding practices, web application firewalls, API security, and then encryption should be used at rest and in transit. This is good for preventing data loss and for our backup solutions. And then we also want to increase user awareness through security training. We can even do phishing simulations and back it up with policy enforcement. I believe, by integrating these approaches, our organization can create a resilient cybersecurity posture that adapts to evolving threats and maintains a strong protection for data, systems, and users. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, I recommend creating a robust security framework by combining best practices for cybersecurity with the NEST cybersecurity framework, and combining that with zero trust architecture and defense in depth. I think this will build a solid foundation for a strong security framework for the company. Zero trust combined with defense in depth, it creates a really nice multi-layer security framework. And it strengthens the access restrictions, detection, and response capabilities by addressing the external and internal threats. However, all this is great, but it has to be embraced by the culture of the company. And so through awareness training, an organization like Equifax can foster security conscious environment to protect its customers and its employees. I believe, though, the key here is the synergy that's achieved by combining all the elements together. For instance, you get enhanced security using defense in depth, which provides a foundational layer of protection, and through its multiple layers of network segmentation. And then zero trust adds a whole nother layer of scrutiny and control. It makes it harder for attackers to get into the network and then be able to move laterally once they're in, if they even get in. And then there's improved threat detection with zero trust, and that with continuous verification and monitoring capabilities, it helps to quickly identify and respond to threats, and then will reduce the risk of data breaches by restricting access and deploy the role-based controls. I think stronger access controls can be achieved by segmenting the networks and then creating logical security zones, while ensuring that there's secure access to these zones. And then, of course, we need better management of IT assets, which is really critical. You got to know what you have in order to maintain it and monitor it so you can protect it. And then finally, as I previously mentioned, we need to focus on building a strong security culture around this security framework. So this case study really illustrates how destructive poor cybersecurity practices can be. And I think the lessons from the data breach should encourage companies to adopt a more proactive, security-first approach to securing customer data. In summary, the Equifax breach it stemmed from a preventable vulnerability that was hindered by poor governance and a flawed response. So by learning from these failures, I believe we can bolster our defenses. And next steps, I recommend a security audit. It will benefit the company by identifying vulnerabilities, ensuring compliance, improving security measures, and enhancing our incident response capabilities. As our ultimate goal should be to protect data and mitigate risks. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions regarding my presentation, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My email address is listed here on the slide. Thank you again.